Thank you and welcome to today's program. This is the first time we'll be discussing a single book. We've collaborated with the Pan-African writers, the African Union, to discuss a set of books. But as a single book, it's the first time we'll be doing that. Everything operates within a context. Books, as you know, are not the primary device of communications in many African countries. Some months ago, a library in Kano was looted and not a single book was stolen. I remember when I come and I load my bag with gifts, I will give some people books and they will say, "Why don't you give me a shirt? Why are you giving me a book?" And to those of us who write books, you know how small the sale can be. But this is not an ordinary book. This book is about talking on the nation. So you can call it the representation of the nation. I don't want to anticipate what the members of the panel will say, but let me express my gratitude to the panelists ahead of time. I will thank them at the end. To our team, located in 3 countries. To our consultants, we have a consultant who manages this conversation. We have technical crew, and we have partners. For those of you who are familiar with us, the Zoom is meant to stream to various platforms. It is those who are interested in asking questions and displaying their presence that appear on Zoom. The bulk of our audience are on television and radio, Facebook, Instagram, and sometimes the cumulative number is in millions. The daily Faro Timi one was watched by over 4 million people. I will not know the number that will be watching this until reports are given to us. Let me introduce our panelists. And I will start with the youngest of them all, Wale Lawal. Wale Lawal is one of the most active young men in the country. He founded the Republic. I remember very clearly, before he launched it, he reached out to me. And I said, "Wale, I'm always busy, come to Ibadan." And he came to Ibadan. And he saw like another 50 people who wanted to see me. So I'm not sure I was able to give him 30 minutes. But we spoke. Fast forward, I was in Arlington and invited me to give a talk for the anniversary independence of Nigeria, which I did in the middle of the night. And then an email came, "Give me your bank account. I want to give you an honorarium." I said, "This is not possible. Nigerians, even if you speak in universities, they don't give you an honorarium." So I thought he was joking. So I said, "Okay, here's my bank account." And the Republic put $500 there. And I've been talking about that forever and forever and forever. That you can do something which you consider small, but it can become bigger. And while you move on to do important podcasts, you recently released the one on Sarawiwa I did not even know that he was the voice. It's a very, very competent podcast on Sarawiwa in 3 parts. If you have not watched it, please let me know. And he has a very good team, including PhD students based in the US. And whenever they report something, it's as competent as any journal, any newspaper like New York Times you can have. He's been able to do Africa-focused journalism, digital media solution. He's an editor. I think when he puts this together, he's qualified for many, many big awards. He went to school. I don't have to state that. He led a research at Harvard Business School, Africa Research Center, where he produced research on companies and business environments across Africa. He's a management consultant, graduated top of his class from Oxford University, where his thesis covered economic uncertainty and tech setup. And I'm very glad when he was chosen by Quartz in 2019 as one of Africa's top 30 innovators. And in 2021, Reuters chose him as a global leader. And Forbes magazine selected him as one of Africa's 30 under 30. I'm very proud of him. I'm very, very proud of him. And I hope he will continue like this to become a major figure. And let me contrast him with the oldest panelist, Senator Babafemi Ojudu. If you have not read his memoir, I think you should go and read it, about his journalism experience with a very brilliant title. I know him. He moves around academics a lot. Last week, I spoke with him when they were celebrating the Ochonu in Ekiti. And I've had occasions to interact with him. And I've also had occasion to interact with his successful son, who is a prominent one of, his son is as good as Wale in terms of developing the future of our country. He's a media entrepreneur, politician, over 4 decades in governance, in democracy, public discourse. I think he's retired from politics, and one question we can ask him is, why did you retire from politics? He's an advocate for press freedom and good governance. And you cannot write about Nigerians' democratic struggle without giving him a passage, a chapter, and his own recognition. He's from Azubuike. He has a house in Azubuike where he still lives. For those of you who think you cannot live outside of Lagos and Abuja, he lives in Ekiti. And it's public service with integrity. He represented Ekiti Central. And he served as special advisor on political matters to the president. Welcome, Senator Ojudu. Let me go to the professor, Moses Ochonu. I've known him since his graduate days at the University of Michigan. And he attained stature even as a student, and he's been building on that stature. He's one of Nigeria's preeminent public intellectuals using Facebook and other media. He writes on a daily basis. In other words, splitting his time between his career as a professor, writing his book, and he's done 5 books, but writing more on Facebook for magazines, contributed to Time Magazine, Maple Tree Literary Supplement, Chronicle of Higher Education, Global Post, Logos, and many more. He's very famous in Nigeria, and he says his mind. One day I wrote to him and Farouk. I said, I wish I had as much courage as the two of you. And another journalist of considerable stature, renowned, Azubuike Ishiekwene, I've known him for a long time. I think his daughter or son attended the University of Texas, where I first met him. And it's a privilege. I reviewed two of his latest books. I wrote a foreword to the two of them, and I reviewed one of them. He's the editor-in-chief of Leadership, an Abuja-based newspaper, and has been a journalist for 37 years and the founding member of Global Editors Network. He served as the chair of the judging panel of the CNN African Journalists, and his recent book, which I reviewed, Writing for Media and Monetizing It, and is a fellow of the Nigerian Guild of Editors. We chose them for different reasons, for their different take. And as usual, we do not know what they are going to say because we do not micromanage this conversation. Let me start with the first question directed at all. And Wale can start. Why do you think our politicians are now obsessed with writing their autobiographies? Why are they writing their own stories? And why should they take them seriously?
All right. I'm hoping that you can hear me. Thank you so much for that introduction and for organizing this, Professor Falola. I'm going to just go straight into a response here, and I think that and Professor Ochonu can also probably agree with this. I think in many ways, history is the last frontier, right, of justice or of displays of power. And I think it goes back to that thing that Winston Churchill is very famous for saying, history will be kind to me because I intend to write it. And so it's very, very clear that, in this type of, I mean, I've had a big question here and I'm still trying to understand what the purpose of writing this book is beyond just even this display of power. You are right. It's an extraordinary book. It's not an ordinary book, but it's also not a necessary book. He doesn't need to write this book because however Nigerians feel, will always be how Nigerians feel towards him. And there's very little, that Nigerians have been able to do to either challenge his legacy or to speak about things. And so I think in many ways, it's really about this idea of even controlling how you are remembered or controlling the legitimate public memory, of you. And it's a very, very interesting time, to be doing this where, at the Republic, we're talking a lot about public memory. One big area of public memory, for example, is, the execution of the Ogoni Nine, which happened 30 years ago. And he was very present at the beginnings of that movement, and we can still kind of see how public memory still functions in Nigeria with issues like the battle bus that Sokari Douglas Camp, the British Nigerian sculptor created in honor of the Ogoni Nine, that was banned from entering Nigeria. If anything, it was arrested from entering Nigeria. And so contrasting that, a bus that was meant to honor the legacies of the Ogoni Nine, who, by the way, are still not exonerated yet, to the reception that this book from a military dictator has gotten, I think we get to see the sense that, there are power dynamics at play, and that this is only possible because, because of this dictator that we have that's also trying to take control over how he is remembered. I don't necessarily see this as some sort of reformation or as some sort of becoming born again, and trying to correct things. It's very difficult to process it as that. I don't think we're that naive, but I do see it as a way of controlling the narrative in many ways. Whether that control will be effective is a very different question. But in terms of how we should, take that, I do think that we should take it very seriously. And I think we should take it very seriously for many reasons. The first being the one I just mentioned about how who gets to shape public memory. Giving the example I just said about the Ogoni Nine, also putting that in contrast here as well. We should also take it seriously because I think what students of history, of African history in particular, are often taught is, this idea of how to engage with archives, right? Are we reading along the grain or against the grain? I think this is going to be an example of that, where as much as we may disagree with what is in the book, we should always be asking ourselves, why is this being mentioned? Or how is this being mentioned? What can we learn from the ways in which certain narratives have been put out as well? There's a big, big area of the book where he talks about Abacha's influence on annulling the elections. I'm also very interested in that. Why is that presented that way? And I think that these are interesting and very important questions for us to ask. Also important to ask are questions such as, what is not being included here? What is not being mentioned here? And I think one big area, is retributive justice that needs to happen, which is obviously not being mentioned enough. So I think it's a very, very important book, but maybe not for the reason that might appear. It's not important because, he's written this to correct any form of history. I don't really think that that's the importance here. But I think it's important because it needs to teach us just how power works and how power interacts with public memory. Not everybody gets to shape public memory. And as we've seen, the fact that a dictator can do this in a way that's accepted by political elites, I think, should prompt us to ask some very important questions.
That's a brilliant thesis, I must say, because it hasn't occurred to me that way. Moses, what do you think?
Well, I agree with Wale. I think that we humans are naturally disposed to controlling the stories of our lives. We don't want others to define us. We want to define ourselves. A prominent African philosopher, Achille Mbembe, characterized it uh, several decades ago in one of his writings as African modes of self-writing. We Africans are particularly because of our socialization and our historical trajectory. Uh, I don't want to use the word obsessed, but I'll go ahead and use it anyway. We are obsessed with, as Wale put it, controlling our narratives. Certainly, IBB, when he was in power, there was an aura of inscrutability around him. There was a certain mystery that was attributed to him. He was called all kinds of names, Maradona, and so on and so forth, right? And my theory of it is that it served him when he was in power. That mystery, that unknowability, the fact that he was an enigma and was presented as an enigma. And I'm glad that Senator Ojudu is here because in his journalistic heydays, he was one of the crafters of that narrative about IBB. But at that time, it served IBB's interest to be presented and understood and perceived in that manner as a man of mystery. But as after he left power, that narrative was no longer useful to him, had no longer had a utility to him. Rather, I would say that it became a burden on his legacy. This idea of unknowability, Babangida as a mystery, Babangida as somebody who is not known, whose background we do not fully know. And as you grow older, you become more conscious, obviously, about your mortality. And along with that comes anxieties about how you are going to be portrayed and understood after you are gone. And I think this book partly emanates from that anxiety. It's a book of written out of anxiety, out of fear, out of a certain desire to, you know, create a personal archive and to create a certain archaeology and a certain template for how he would be understood, how his policies will be interpreted long after he's gone. There's nothing special about what he's done. In terms of memoirs and autobiographies, you know, these are essentially exercises. With all due respect, Professor Falola, because I know you've written a few yourself, a few acclaimed ones, but essentially these are exercises in, you know, presenting a personal archive and shaping that archive and that story in a way that suits us. You share what you are comfortable sharing. You don't share what you are not comfortable sharing. And so, as far as this memoir goes, and I think Wale alluded to this, the unsaid, might be more interesting than what it said in the memoir. But having said that, I think that, you know, Wale, I didn't know you were a historian, but you bring up a very insightful point about reading along the grains and against the grain. And I want to run with that idea that you've put on the table, which is that, you know, a lot of Nigerians, understandably, are outraged that he has written this book and that he has attempted to shape public debate and narrative about, you know, his time in power. But I want to take a slightly contrarian view. I want to say that we have almost made it impossible for him not to write this book because of the way that we have talked about him and his regime since he left power. We left him with no choice. We subtly or sometimes directly put pressure on him to write the book. But not only that, and maybe this is the last thing I will say on this question, I think that um, the idea of reading along the grain is that it is important, even if you dislike an author of the book, the personality of the author, you dislike everything he did in power, to try to understand the processes and the protocols that led him to some of the decisions, to try to pry away the curtain and reveal the inner workings of the military, right? Some of the interpersonal connections and interactions that produce some of these important moments that Babangida discusses in the book. And finally, I would say that along those lines, you have to you get into a mode where to fully understand how certain systems work, you have to give a certain benefit of doubt to the people who worked in that system, however self-serving their narratives may be. So I think in that spirit, it is important to read this book, and it is important to read it with as open a mind as possible. You know, he is, Babangida, like him or not, is a principal character in some of the political dramas that have led us to where we are as a country. And so in that spirit, you want to give this book as much attention as possible. I was called out when as I was reading the book, I made a post on Facebook. Professor Falola, you talked about my writings on Facebook, and I made a post. Because, you know, as I was reading it, I was thinking aloud, and this thought occurred to me, and I thought to just put it on Facebook to see how people reacted to it. And somebody, our mutual friend, Ikiri, called me out and said, "Why are you reading this book by this awful person?" and this poorly written book that has sections that are plagiarized, and you are a crusader against plagiarism. You are always writing against plagiarism. So why are you according this book so much dignity and respect? And I said, well, first of all, I have to participate in this session with Professor Falola. But second of all, I kind of piggybacked on the point that Wale was reading about reading along the grain. You don't have to agree with a person or with a system in order to try to understand it as a basis, as a baseline for critiquing it, for discussing it. So I'll leave it there and I'll let others respond.
Senator, let me ask a question on behalf of victims. And you may not know this. Professor Folabo Ajayi joined us. I don't know whether she's still here. They came to campus Babangida sent people to pick me. I was picked under his regime. Under his regime. People have asked me, when are you going to write about it? And I said, I've not gotten to writing my memoirs. I've not gotten to those years of my life. What is picking me and clamping us in house detention and later at Yagonku prison cell is so small compared to those who experienced death, who had to run away, who took the Nadeko route. We have not taken the Nadeko route. As a researcher, I will take you through it. I can volunteer, I know the route. I just didn't read about it. I said, let me take this route myself. And I did, because that's how my spirit works. Can you talk about the victims? If you are a victim, how will you read this book? Afsat was supposed to join us, Abiola, and he said he doesn't want to read the book because it's going to have mental torture. If you want to speak for the victims, what will you say?
Yeah, thank you, Prof. I really appreciate this opportunity to discuss Babangida's book. And let me say that when you introduced me, you forgot to say that I was also your student in Ife. I didn't study history, but
now I can't call it senator my student.
I didn't read history, but general studies. You taught us general studies, and we always spoke behind you about your legendary Volkswagen and the pen you always had, locked in your ear in those days. Honestly, I mean, it's I have read Babangida's book. I don't see anything wrong about reading it, despite the fact that I and my colleagues were victims. I think it's important to read him because even if he was not telling the truth, you probably will be able to compare what you know or what you have heard to what is claiming to have happened. One thing that is very, very clear about this is that Babangida himself, I think, feels guilty about what happened. He's a troubled mind, very troubled mind. I've visited him twice since he left government. And on each occasion, I asked him if he was going to publish his autobiography. And he said, emphatic no. And each time when I said, okay, if you are not writing, some of us can write about it. He said, well, that will be your book. That's not my book. I want to go to my grave with those stories. So for me, how he now changed his mind and decided to write is something that is worth investigating by journalists. How I wish it was that period that we practiced. We probably will have been able to find a clue to it. Let me also say that going through that book, I know that is not, Babangida didn't write that book. Some people pressured him to write it for whatever reason it is, because as someone said, it is also poorly written. It's not so, if you sit down and get somebody sit in front of you and you tell your stories, it will have still standard better than what we have in that book. So it's a tortured book, just as his own mind is tortured too. The impression of Babangida about himself, or his vision of himself, is stronger than what later emerged. For me, as a victim, for my other colleagues, I think, except for the people who lost their mother, their father, or husband or whatever, I saw my victimhood, Babangida, as one of the sacrifices one has to make for a developing country. When you're fighting for the rights of the people, good governance, for democracy, you know from the onset that you are going to somehow become a victim. So I do not even in any way at any time hold it against him. He himself, was a victim of himself. He's a victim, and that's why I said from the onset that he is a troubled mind, and he will be troubled to the end, of his life. Because imagine Babangida, giving up power on, after June 12th, the kind of, image that will have cultivated around the world, the kind of assignment will have been given around the world, the kind of swagger that we'll have had in this country today. And I strongly believe that he lives in regrets that didn't happen. He was a victim of his own machination, of the plots within the plots of his administration, and of the history that he had to encounter too in the course of his governance. So sometimes when you think you are smart, you often outsmart yourself, and that exactly was what happened. So I am a victim. My friends are victims. Babangida himself is a victim. Abacha, is a victim. Diya is a victim. So the victim, cut across the lines. So it's a victimhood here. I think the major victim of this process of this period in our history is Nigeria. We are still today reeling from the fact of that victimhood, and I'm not too sure that in the next 50 years or 100 years we are still going to be able to get out of it. So for me, it's not the individual that are victims. It's Nigeria that is the major victim, and it's getting more and more difficult for us to be able to remove that victimhood from Nigeria. We are going to suffer the consequences for many years to come, and I'm not also sure that we are prepared, or we are preparing another generation that will be able to take Nigeria out of this victimhood. So I read the book. I found a number of things that will be useful for my own writings in future in that book. A number of things came out, curious. And because I've seen this man and I've engaged him, I'm able to see that rather than, assail him with curses and abuse, we should just pity him. He needs to be pitied.
Oh, that's a strong one, that you have to pity a former president of a country. And my mind is also thinking that maybe in future we'll pity Trump too as well. But there have been many books also on June 12 and some of the stories. Babangida's book. As a writer, can you compare his book with related books? And how will his book stand in relation to these other books? Unmute yourself. Please unmute yourself.
All right. Can you hear me now? I hope you can. Good. Thank you very much, Prof, for having me on this panel to discuss IBB's book. Talking about history, and I will come to the point about comparing his book to some of the books that have been written on this subject, which I have also read, on Babangida. I think it was John F. Kennedy that said that history is a relentless master. It has no past, it has no present, only the past rushing towards the future. And we see that, in my view, in display in the book that Babangida has just published, which he calls a journey in service. I just also want to, before I come to the question you have asked, Prof, also would like to, say a few words regarding what colleagues had said in the past about the book and, where it stands. I think that even though Babangida had not written in the last 32 years, he has granted a number of significant interviews. And those interviews will give you an idea about how his mind is working. And incidentally, one of the interviews which he granted to Tell magazine is also an appendix in his current book. And so that also helps to, that interview with Tell, I also interviewed him, as I'm sure that distinguished Senator Ojudu and others who may be on this call have interviewed him. And these interviews are documented. Many of the interviews are Q&A, and so the Q&A, at least the one that he published in his book, will mean essentially that he reproduced faithfully what he was supposed to have said in those interviews. And they just give you an insight into the tortured mind which Senator Ojudu spoke about, the struggle that he has been through in the last 32 years. But let me then go directly to your question, Prof. And that is some of the books that I have read and how they compare with the one, the journey in service that Babangida has written. I remember very clearly the book by Maximilian, Soldiers of Fortune. And Soldiers of Fortune covers the period between 1983 and 1993. And that for that period, Babangida took the chunk. Babangida was in charge for most of that period. So in my view, that book was that book gives you a very, very useful insight into the person that Babangida is. And I must also say that I'm not aware of any, of any responses to some of the facts that Maximilian wrote in his book. And I'll just share a few of them very quickly for time's sake. One of the fundamental takeaways from Max's book was the fact that between 1983 and 1993, 117 persons were killed for all sorts of coups or whatever Babangida said it was. 78 of them were executed under Babangida's regime out of the 117 that were executed, all right? 78 of them were executed under Babangida's regime. And that just gives you a sense of the kind of mind and the kind of turmoil and the chaos within that space. He also said, Max also said in his book that, I think he said it was sometime in 1991, Babangida paid out something like, I want to get the figure correct now, about 2% of the budget. He used it to buy off the loyalty of the military by buying them cars. And in the subsequent budget, I think it's in the 2019 budget. That's about, if you put that against the 2019 budget, it works out to something in Max's book about 178 billion. That was what, that's what you find there. And the book, and on and on and on. And it's a very interesting book, and I'd recommend it. Of course, Mr. Dan Egbesi also wrote a book, IBB, the military, politics, and power. I also wrote a book. And of course, Dr. Chidi Amuta also wrote The Prince of the Niger. The Prince of the Niger essentially was a book that talks about the Babangida years, growing up and all of that. Quite, flattering and adulatory, if you like, of him. But of all the three books that I have mentioned, the one that really gives you a very fascinating insight of how this history of the past is rushing towards the future is the book by Marx. It just gives you a clear idea. And, that's just what it is. And I think it's a book, as I said, that I would recommend for others, and just a word or two before I pause regarding how I then compare this. And so if you look at Babangida's book, for example, and you take what Maximilian said about the executions that occurred, and you see his narration of those executions, especially one of the most, no single execution is a good one, but if you take one of the most infamous, the execution of Mama Vatsa and the others, there is absolutely no trace of some of the facts that later came to light about how they were executed. And I share a few of them with you. For example, I understand by the research that I have done that before the law that under which they were tried, that law, the decree was actually promulgated after they had been arrested. Interestingly, in that decree also, there was a provision for appeal, but they were executed before the appeal even happened. And you would find nothing of this in Babangida's book, as his own history rushes towards the future. This is just one. There are quite a number of them. Senator Ojudu has talked about, what colleagues in the news, Tempo, and I think I love the way he put it in the end, what the whole of Nigeria went through. But we in the press can never forget that in 1993, Babangida shut down 25 newspapers, some of them twice. In the year before that, he shut down 41 newspapers. More newspapers were shut down under Babangida's regime than under any single regime in the country's history. You know, so these are some of the gaps that I think might be interesting for us to, you know, keep in mind as we examine, you know, this very interesting book that Babangida has written. I'll pause for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Let me start with Senator. For those of you who have not read his book, this is it. I don't know whether I'm holding it properly. Can you see it?
No.
What am I doing wrong?
Okay, yes. Yeah, I can see it now. Probably hold to, okay.
The Guerrilla Journalists. You want to talk about this book in relation to Babangida's book?
Yes, I would like to do that. It's again.
Why did you become a guerrilla?
It wasn't by choice. It wasn't at all. Let me say that you know, we first ran into trouble with Babangida in 1990 when I and my colleagues were working in his bosom friend's media, the African Concord. African Concord was a very staid, you know, on an interesting, you know, publication until 1989, when some of us moved into the magazine. And those of us who went to work there were mainly products of Ife, who left Ife in the 83, 84, 85, believing that we have been sufficiently equipped by people like you to change Nigeria. So, so we went to Concord, we changed Concord, and we turned it into what we thought that should be an ideal magazine, you know, that could not spare anyone, could not spare any subject. And in 1990, when Babangida gave an interview to the Daily Times, and he then said he's amazed that Nigeria has not collapsed, you know, and we thought, how could somebody be president of a country and you will be amazed that that country has not collapsed? And we then had a Nigeria meeting and said, look, let us look at what exactly it is about Nigeria that has not made it collapse under Babangida. That was, you know, when we did this robust edition that really eyed Babangida, and he sent his troop to go and shut down Concord. Shut down all of the newspapers, the magazine, and the other businesses of Abiola. And when that happened, I then went to Chief Gani Fayemi, and I said I wanted to sue Babangida because he had no right to shut down my publication. By the way, I was chairman of the local chapel of NUJ then. And Gani was told me, look, young man, you know, prayer will be put on you and they will ask you to drop this case. And I said, no, nothing could stop me except death. And the following day, Gani was in court with me to file a suit. And the evening after, Abiola called me to his house and chastised me, abused the hell out of him, quite like him. He was very angry. Who is your father in this town? Have you ever done any business before? This and that kind of thing. And threw me out of his house. So then, of course, 2 days after, he then also invited me and said, young man, well, I can understand. Because you see, the thing about African Concord was that why he enjoys the adulation from friends, you know, and the generality of the people for us standing on the side of the people, he also had problem with his friends who constantly call him to tell him, look, these boys are harassing us. You know, you are the one sending them, and we deny that. Look, they have the freedom to do their work. I don't control anything. So he called us. He called me in, and later I think Bayo Nanuga too. That look, you guys, you know, you can write. You are good at writing. Go and just spend 2 paragraphs to say that you regretted your action, and then Babangida will come and you know, reopen these premises. Meanwhile, some days before, he himself had done an apology in his writing, in his own handwriting, And Babangida leaked it to Daily Times, and it was on the front page of Daily Times. So we looked at him and said, okay, fine. If you want us to apologize, we will apologize. We then went back to our office and composed our letter of resignation. And that was it. Everywhere was agog with the story. That for me began, was the beginning of what was later tagged as guerrilla journalism. So we then decided to come together to do a magazine that will not be beholden to nobody, that will be free. And then we came up with the idea of the news. And we were barely 3 weeks on the street when we experienced again another another sacking by the Babangida administration. And we then, of course, said, look, we have to find a solution to this. It became constant, under 6 months. The last straw was when we had an interview with General Buhari, which we titled "While I Was Toppled." You should try and get hold of that interview. It revealed a lot, quite a lot about Babangida, and it was again livid. It was at the point where we were collating it. They didn't even allow that to come out before they. It was at the point where we were collating it that they stormed the premises, which again was an Abiola premises that we had to hire to do the collating and the finishing. And they stormed the place that night, and they made us pack all of the editions into 2 trucks that they brought, and they took away. The night after, that same night, we tried to meet, and then we could not even say anything. We were tired. We were exhausted. We had put all the resources at our disposal into producing that edition. Then we just dispersed that night. I said we should reconvene the following day. So it was the following day. We now decided that, look, it's time. We cannot give up on this battle. We may not be able to afford the luxury of a glossy magazine. Let's do a tabloid. And that was how we came up with Tempo magazine, which then became a phenomenon in Nigeria. Yeah. At that point, we no longer could work at any office. We could no longer, print openly. We could no longer distribute, openly and all of that. I think that was the moment when, we had to write a story here, edit it somewhere else, print somewhere, get vehicles of other media houses to help us distribute across Nigeria. Sometimes meet at the stadium in Lagos or inside buses and all of that. That was at the point when we were tagged guerrilla, because now we're not using the regular way of doing things. And that was when, of course, constantly we were being arrested, locked up, family arrested. You will not believe that Dako's son was just about 3 months old when they were looking for Dako Oloriyomi. They couldn't find him. They arrested the wife and the baby and kept them in DMI at Awapa for almost 6 months. It was that bad at that period of time. So Dako had to run away from Nigeria, went on exile in US. Bayo too went on exile. Kunle was, I narrowly missed being arrested for participating in a coup. Kunle became a victim. They tried him, sent him to 3 years in jail. No, rather, they sent him to life imprisonment. He spent 3.5 years before he was released. So this, in a nutshell, is our story, but it's longer and more detailed than that, which you find in that book. But I think that was what is meant by guerrilla journalism. Again, we took inspiration from the journalists, and our colleagues, senior colleagues who fought the British during the colonial period to secure independence for Nigeria. We also took inspiration from those who fought to keep Nigeria one during the Civil War, and those who also fought actively to compel the military to hand over power to civil regimes. And we just are looking forward to people like us who are still there now to inspire the younger ones to fight that, we must run this democracy properly. We must advocate, development, and we must, again, campaign against corruption, which is very, very rampant now, and ensure that this country has a breather. It has suffered for too long. It will not require a guerrilla operation, but something has to be done. Thank you.
While listening to the senator,
yes,
And this question is directed. Well, you've just listened to the senator. How you compare to what members of your generation are doing today in relation to the government with what the senator is talking about? So when it was at Ife, it was very vibrant. It was extremely vibrant. The left was active. Seminars were very active. People were afraid. If you write a paper, you'd be afraid to even present it because it would tear you apart. These are genuine criticisms. And there was a lot of expectations on leadership. What do you see today? A youth couple just criticized Tinubu and they were harassing the poor girl. So, and I also asked Moses later on, where is intellectual space today? Where is the activist space? And is social media not deceiving all of us? That if we can just go on social media, write something, that we've done our part. I know it's a difficult question that I'm asking you, but you can also take it as a critique of your generation, if you like.
Of course, and I think, I think the critique is welcome. I think, for us to really discuss the core question, I think, it's also important for us to look at the context here, right? So it's a younger generation. Nigeria has kind of gone through years of, let's say, degradation. So the challenges that we're facing are kind of follow-on outcomes of some of that degradation as well. And a good way of looking at this is really understanding the fact that universities and young people have in many ways lost their hold over the political dynamics of the country. I think we're looking at a time where, going back as far as the independence movement, one thing I'm always fond of sharing is just how much of that independence movement was championed by students. If you want to look at the Zikis, if you want to look at the wider student movements, they all were very, very key players in the push for independence. And we saw that energy sustained even into the post-colonial early military era. But then, of course, you're looking at a public sphere that has also gone through SAPs, structural adjustment programs, that has gone through military repression that deliberately weakened universities. We're coming from a time where, and we speak a lot about the left, but, a lot of people who look at the history of the left can often, trace the left having very strong academic foundations. There was the more academic arm, there was the more trade unions arm. But what we've seen is over the years, these forms of mass movements that were very open to students, that were very, very, very democratic in terms of access, just kind of lost structure. And that structure, that loss of structure was due to, on one hand, military repression, but also on the other hand, a lot of economic strangulation. And so now you have a youth generation that is now trying to kind of pick up the pieces in many ways. And in some ways, we are kind of benefiting from the advances of technology. We're able to run decentralized movements. We're able to run, protests very quickly. But I think that's something that we're very much learning is a big part of what it takes to change things, what it takes to really be a viable political force is being able to translate a protest or transform a protest into a sustained movement. I think that we're very good at throwing protests. We're very good at organizing protests. We're not so good yet at transforming protests into sustained movements. And a sustained movement is very different from a protest. A protest can be organized from social media. You will get all the fanfare, all the media, you will get all the attention. But a movement it's a lot less gratifying. There's that instant gratification is not there. You will have to do work that people are not going to notice. You will have to sit down in judicial panels. You will have to really change the ways that things happen. And oftentimes, this is an area where a lot of young people are having to learn. I think when we look back at NSAS, for example, or some of the more recent protests or movements that we've seen, I think a very big mistake and something that even young people have, started to criticize themselves about is not really learning from the lessons that we saw in previous movements. I think there was this idea that, you know, we were all doing this for the first time, and that there was a sort of novelty to what we were doing, that a lot of previous generations, I think, could have been very useful at educating us on, or at least that we could have learned a bit more, you know, a bit more from. So I would say that, you know, the context that we're facing right now is very different. We don't have as much organization in terms of, you know, civic movements and youth movements or student movements as there was in the past. And that is deliberate because of military repression and also economic strangulation. But I also think that there's a lot that we can learn from the past, and we haven't really been doing a good job at learning from the past. A bit of that is also intentional, right? When we look at the decline in the studies of history that this generation has also had to face. But I think a big advantage that we do have is, you know, just that ability to organize decentralized, you know, just to be decentralized. The vantage point that we have as a younger generation from being able to learn from previous movements, but also in record time from being able to learn from movements that are happening simultaneously elsewhere. I think we have the opportunity to be organized at an even larger scale. And what it will take to get there is just being more informed about where we're coming from, but also not just looking at it as we're starting this from scratch, but also looking at it that there is a long history of protest, there is a long history of change, and a long history of movements that we can tap into. We've not done a good job of doing that, you know, recently, but I think there's a big opportunity to do that, and there's a lot that we can achieve when we start to look at the past, but also when we start to look at what is working in other regions, but also what is not working. There's a lot that we can also learn from why other movements failed or why other movements are failing that we can then take on now. But I do think that young people have woken up to this. And I think that now the question is not just how to organize protests or make movements, but it's how to organize protests that are informed and how to make movements that are longer lasting. I think that that's where we're at right now.
Thank you. Moses, what about professors? And let me create a context. In building the Nigerian nation in the 50s, they played a prominent role. They were developing ideas. Awolowo became famous, and many of the things created to him were made possible by the intellectuals that surrounded him. The socialist document created by Luko and others, Oluwasami and others, is one of his major speeches, the one that led to the cancellation of the censors, was an intellectual project. It was not just him sitting down saying, this is just my whole idea. So because if you read that major speech, the government was very worried, full of data, full of hard work, which he now put his own intellectual energy into doing. And if you look at the Nigerian Civil War, there's an untold story about it. And maybe some people will be hearing it for the first time. That many of the ideas were incubated at the University of Ibadan. Ojukwu picked on it, but those ideas were already there. I mean, they were saying, how do we move this nation forward? And if secession was part of it, let it be. And if you see the early writings of those secessionist movements, these were solid intellectual projects. And look at the ambassadors they appointed, Odike, Achebe, these were intellectuals. As ambassadors of the nation, you may not agree with them, but today, where are these intellectuals? The left has left. The Nigerian intellectuals no longer contribute as before to Nigerian newspapers. Their voices have been vacated. Not that anybody wants to throw them in jail, voluntary exile, voluntary not writing anything. Are they tired? Are they fatigued? And you now see the chairman of a local government who is your PA, one Professor Ajiboye. If you go to Abuja, and I'm not exaggerating this, there are many professors as PA. I know of a politician with 7 PAs who are professors. No, I don't know whether that's when Senator Ojudu was senator. Maybe one of his PA was a professor. I don't know. So what is really going on? What is going on?
Thanks, Professor Falola, for that thought-provoking question. You know, incidentally, the book that we are here to discuss, there's a passage in that book, the IBB's memoir, that struck me. And when I was reading the book, I marked out that paragraph. And in that paragraph, he talks about how, you know, the 1966 coup, right? That was the seminal coup that began all the drama. That the ideas, whether you agree with it or not, is not my issue. But I was struck by the fact that he, in his analysis of that coup, he talks about how those young military officers had been influenced by ideas coming out of Ibadan specifically, coming out of especially left intellectuals in Ibadan for the most part, but also intellectuals from other spaces in the country who were critiquing the status quo and asking the tough questions about what was going on in the country in the First Republic, and talking about how the First Republic was a betrayal of the vision of independence and of the expectations of independence, and how those young majors led by Nzegu had been motivated by some of those rhetoric, some of those ideas coming out of the universities and those intellectual spaces and hubs and clusters. But, you know, at that time, at the time in the 60s and the 70s, there were vibrant intellectual spaces, absolutely. But there were also coherent ideologies that guided the conversations in those spaces. I think that is what is missing now, because those ideological spaces have disintegrated and under the weight of all kinds of things, both events that are both local and international, the collapse of communism and the transition to a unipolar world, and so on and so forth. Some of the local forces that have disintegrated these ideological clusters has been the fact that now I think academics and intellectuals are more preoccupied with existential struggles and anxieties, you know, just trying to stay alive and to live a decent life and to provide for your family. When you are preoccupied with those questions, what there's an old professor of mine in college used to call the gradual reduction of life to the quest for food. You know, when life becomes reduced to that, I think what happens is that intellectual conversations are diminished, but even where they exist, their quality tends to also diminish. So the regularity diminishes, but also the quality diminishes. So that's what is going on. That's partly what is going on. Another aspect of the issue has to do with the fragmentation of public intellectualism. It used to be the fact that people like Edwin Madunagu and other intellectuals and academics, Adebayo Williams, whom I used to read back in the days, and Niyo Shundare, you know, they had a robust presence in the magazines that Senator Ojudu founded and some other ones, and in the newspapers. So there was a synergy between the academy and the world of journalism and the world of public debates that held people in power in check and held them accountable. Now, what we have is that the spaces where these conversations used to occur are now troubled. The traditional media, I'm sure Senator Judu knows this very well, and Azu himself, being an editor, knows this very well. The traditional presses and journalistic venues are now troubled. That model is now threatened by financial struggles, by all kinds of pressures. And so those spaces are no longer there. The spaces where intellectuals can really stand their ground and contribute their voices and ideas to public intellection and debates. Those spaces have become fragmented, and some of them have dissolved completely. But it's not all bad news, because now we have the emergence of social media. We have the emergence of other spaces. There is the good side of social media, which is that it has democratized the intellectual space. So it's no longer the academics and the people in Ibadan and Ife and Nsukka who can participate and drive national conversations and ask tough questions and critique those in power. It is regular people now who have the technology of writing, who have a computer, a phone, a smartphone, or any of these technologies, who can participate. So that is a good thing. It is not necessarily a bad thing. So it is now a democratized intellectual space. And that is why more people are asking more questions of people in power. That is how I like to read it. I like to read it optimistically. But on the other hand, because of the existence of social media and these alternative new media spaces to drive some of these critical conversations, the role of the intellectual, the role of the academic as a conscience of the nation, as a generator of ideas for development and for accountability has diminished. Young people nowadays have a lot of impatience with reading long essays and long grammar. I don't blame them. So with the emergence of social media, the attention span is shorter. They don't want to read. Back in the days, I used to read those long essays written by Chebe and Oshundari and all. The young people nowadays don't want to read that. They want carefully packaged nuggets written for Twitter that can fit into Twitter, or can fit into a Facebook post. So that's the world we're living in. But not only that, I think that there is also an impatience with the kind of ideological strictures and ideological rigidities that used to define public intellectuals in the period that you were talking about, Professor Falola. There's a lot of, there's an impatience now with that. What is going on now is that the news cycle is shorter. The news cycle, people move on too quickly now. It goes back to what Wale was saying about sustainability. You can start activism can begin, but it is hard to sustain it because the news cycle is shorter. People move on from one news to another. People don't quite stay on focus. Whereas when I was reading the news, when I was reading Temple, I think I was in the university then. There were issues that would be introduced by those magazines into the public consciousness, and they will stay in the public consciousness for months on end. Now, that is no longer the case. People are looking for the next news high. It's almost like a drug now. They are looking for the next big event. They are looking for the next controversy. And those controversies are not even necessarily developmental in character. Some of them have to do with tabloid gossip, and Bobrisky does this today, this person does that. So that has had the effect also of, I think, diminishing the quality of our national conversation and the ability of intellectuals to hold people in power to account and to generate the kind of ideas that defined the Awolowo era, that contributed to those moments that you spoke about. And finally, let me relate what I was trying to say also with the book that we're here to discuss today. As I was thinking about this, it occurred to me that if we didn't have social media, perhaps IBB would not have written this book. Perhaps he would have kept his promise to you, Senator Ojudu, when you met him. And the reason I say that is that the reason I make that statement is that it is social media that has amplified some of the questions and critiques of IBB in the last 10, 15 years that has, I think, compelled him to write this book, because now you have multiple avenues and multiple platforms and multiple venues where some of these perceptions of IBB can propagate, can acquire a life of their own, can be reproduced. In the old days, it was mostly in the newspapers and magazines. And like you said, they could just bring their trucks and their military people and just seize the copies and so on and so on and so forth. And they could define the story, and they could prevent the story, the negative stories from reaching future generations, from reaching the public. Now, that is no longer possible. So I think that social media has redefined some of these spaces of activism. It's made it possible on one hand, but it's also constrained it, so that now you have people who are able to contribute, but also people who are quite easily who move to other issues quite easily. So sustainability becomes a challenge. So that is one of the things that I see that coming out of this book, for instance. He has written this book. The timing, I don't think, is coincidental. We live in a time of dizzying change. A lot is changing in the whole landscape. And I think Babangida sees the moment and says, well, let me write into this space that is so fragmented, that is so democratized, that is no longer controlled by single entities, governmental entities. Let me write into that and try
It's
to
not about the
improve.
it's not about the 75 billion.
No. So I say, it could be, that could be part of the equation, but I don't think Babangida is a poor man to begin with. So I don't think he sat in his living room and said, "Well, let me write a book that will make me billions."
I want to assume you are a religious person from the name you gave to your WhatsApp profile, grace and gratitude. And if you are not a religious person, you have to forgive me. Suppose somebody were to ask you, why do evil people last long? So, okay, he's an evil person. There was a time millions of Yoruba people were abusing him, they were cursing him. There was even a time in church, people would say he would die, he would regret. Assuming you come from the side he's an evil person, why is he alive? And all the good people are dead. Please unmute yourself, or is it our technician? Our technician.
Okay, all right, I've just been unmuted. Very interesting question that you raised, Prof. I think matters of faith and of religion are best kept to oneself, rather than, sort of wearing it on your sleeve. I think it's what you do that actually gives a clearer sense of your faith and belief than what you say. But I mean, if I may just dial back a bit, Prof, and then I'll probably come to your question, because a number of very interesting points have been raised by colleagues on this platform in this conversation. Now, I do not know, and I will accept, I gladly stand corrected on this, that Babangida is interested in social media or is influenced one way or the other by social media content. That will really be a revelation for me. But one clear benefit for me of the impact of social media on the book that we are discussing today is the fact that even though I was away in faraway US when that book was released, and I was really hungry to get a copy of it and to read in order to put me in a position to be able to make any useful comment. I mean, I don't know whether this was intentional or not, but I got the book, the e-copy of the book within perhaps hours after it was written. Now, I do not think that this would have been possible in the past, whether the people behind the book took advantage of it, wanted also to, to engage the public in having this sort of discussion that we are having. But if that is the positive aspect that those who are behind the book leverage social media on, then that's a great thing. But whether the man himself is moved or interested in social media and its contents and its content is an entirely different matter. As to the point, Prof, about why good people don't last. Well, I guess that would be a question perhaps for another one. But it's interesting because that's also one of the major criticisms of the book that we're discussing today. That Babangida sort of bade his time and waited for many of the people who may have been able to challenge him frontally to pass before releasing the book. Well, whether that was intentional or not, again, we wait to see. But an interesting point that has also been discussed, Prof, I think, is how social spaces, whether or academic spaces, whether universities or the media or the vibrant social spaces have sort of waned. The impact of those spaces have waned over time. I will be very reluctant to blame everything almost entirely on the attention crisis, especially that has been exacerbated by social media. I think that if we dial back a bit, and I'm thinking now of the book, A Measure of Grace, written by Professor Akin Mabogunje. And I'm talking now about universities. when the minister of the former Midwestern region, this was how they started, the military started intervening in the universities, wanted to appoint a visitor or something like that in the University of Ibadan, and he resisted it. But I'm not talking about something that happened. I'm talking about something that happened way back. And then what Babangida did, obviously, when he came in his own time, is he went straight into the academia, which he himself had identified as, was it Professor Ochonu said in his book, as one of the centers where ideas for those who, Ndiogo and the others, where those ideas were fomented. Babangida knew the value of that particular space. And my goodness, did he use it? And so part of the problem that we are having are those that, if you look at his book, and again, if you look at chapter 6 of his book, for example, and again, I'm going back to what my Senator Ojudu said about how he tried to cut the press. I mean, how the sort of stranglehold that eventually had. If you go to chapter 6 of his book, he praised himself for starting very well. How he started well and, drew the Tribune group, which was hostile to his government, closer, and he abolished Decree 4 and so forth and so on, and sort of warmed himself into the press. But it, just like the leopard never changes its spots, it didn't take more than 2 years for us to begin to see the sort of person that he was. In 1987, when the Political Bureau released the first report, he prescribed newswatch for 6 months. And this was about 1 year after Delegiwa had been brutally murdered through a passing bomb. And he claimed in the book that Delegiwa was his friend. So you see from those very early beginnings as well, a man who came knowing, if you like, some of the, he obviously, I get a sense that Babangida had an idea clearly of what he wanted to do and what he wanted to do with power. Now, how much of that eventually achieved, as we see from is also the matter that we are discussing here. But I think that in terms of his engagement with the social spaces and academic spaces and the political space, he was very intentional in what he was trying to do. Unfortunately, his script did not end the way he planned it.
Yeah.
It was not what he planned that finally played out, obviously. And for many years, he had to go back to that phrase again, he had the tortured mind. How does he write his own history, in such a way that he controls it, in such a way that had actually been the problem for him. And then, of course, he chose the time that he did it to do it. But, it's I don't know. It's very interesting and quite fascinating, the sort of person that we are dealing with here. How a man who came controlling all the levers, it seemed, came quite subtly controlling all the levers of power. At the end, when he ought to have taken decisions that would have totally changed the trajectory of the entire country, he pulled back and claimed that he was completely at the mercy of fifth columnists. I don't know how a general, I don't know how that happens, how he then suddenly claimed that he found himself at the mercy of fifth columnists. Now, while Babangida lived as long as he did and managed to write his own story 32 years after, when a number of those who might have been around to challenge him have either passed on or are too feeble to respond, is a matter, I think, that historians and perhaps those of us who are still in the profession would be interested to look into going forward.
So Senator Ojudu, does he have to reinvent himself? Because this is what I'm getting from this conversation. There is a process of reinvention. Does he owe anyone that? Does he have to do that?
Hello?
We can hear you, please, sir.
Well, I honestly, I'm not too sure that Babangida was into any business of reinvention. Again, Babangida is is a complex character. That book must have been a product of prayer put on him by, again, some of his academic friends, who were loyal to him, close to him, and who go to him from time to time to seek one assistance or the other. And they keep wanting prayer. He must have collapsed under that prayer. I'm not sure it's somebody who really, wants, to explain so much to people. He didn't want to do that. What has happened. And it's a complex story. So let it be so. But again, sometimes, despite the fact that Babangida could wake up today, and kill a friend, so also could he be very viscerally loyal to some friends, and particularly the one who are their source in the academic environment. And I think, maybe 2 or 3 of them actually mounted prayer on him. And then, okay, yeah, well, it won't take anything away from me. Neither will it add anything. Hey, go and do it. Let's go. Let's do it. That is the way I think he approached that matter. And I believe, as you said, that was, and to make their effort worthwhile. I believe that they were the one that, while the book present was on, they chose to release that e-copy, in the public space. So it's Babangida, although he regretted, and I think that is sincere, he regretted what happened, how he ended. Babangida was one leader who would have loved to, not just to be military head of state. Of course, you could see his covetousness when he came in and tagged himself president. He wanted to find a way, by all means, to transmute from being military president to civilian president. He has studied that. He has equipped himself with how to do it. But again, he find himself in a conundrum that he could not control. A situation where you have 3 of your powerful colleagues, or 2 other powerful colleagues of yours, who had, be assured by marabouts that they too are going to govern Nigeria at one point or the other. The way he too was, much earlier in his career, told by marabout that he was one day going to govern Nigeria. And you have this one of them who is so powerful that he has saved you from so-called coups twice, and who has a command of soldiers who are also very loyal to him. So he was a victim of plots within a plot, and he had to scamper for refuge when he lost control completely. So it wasn't that he didn't know what he was up to. It wasn't that. It's just that sometimes when you, as I said earlier, when you are smart, you are outplayed by somebody who is smarter than you. If you look at the role that Abacha played at the point of the annulment, and then immediately after the annulment, the appointment of Shonekan and the overthrow of Shonekan, you will know that, it must have been under prayer by Abacha truly, that look, you have to go. You can't, initially you can't give power to Abiola. Now that we have succeeded in not giving power to Abiola, you can't stay longer anymore. It is my turn. And I think I needed to make this point here, that the moment that happened, Abacha found a good, leg worker, a good PR in Dia. Dia was the one who summoned the civil society in Lagos to meetings upon meetings. I was not part of the meeting, but every night when the meeting was over, Beko always briefed me on the outcome of that meeting. And Abiola too was convinced that, look, here we have democratic generals who were against the annulment of this election, who we need to take over power from Shonekan, clean up the army, take those people who are anti-Abiola away from the army, and then 3 months after, hand over power to Abiola. It was a case of deception. We were all deceived, both the media and the civil society, because the kind of resistance we had for the Babangida regime, if we had used it on Abacha immediately after he took over power, you know, he probably wouldn't have been able to stay that long. But we were told that 3 months, give him 3 months, he was going to hand over. Even some very progressive military officers too were taken in by his deceit, his deception. You know, someone like Colonel Abubakar Umar supported him to take out Shunekan, believing that he was going to immediately hand over. And the moment he saw that he was not going to hand over, then of course they had to go, and he started, you know, planning his own thing, and they had to go for him. Even Dia, I'm not too sure that Dia was part of his staying for as long as he stayed. Dia too must have been convinced that he was going to hand over power, because as soon as that didn't happen, Dia became disgruntled and began to talk to people on what to do and what not to do. And I have evidence of this, because, I mean, at the point when, you know, I had written a very serious story against Abacha and the Shaguri families, and, you know, the executionists were sent after me. It was Dia that called a friend to warn me to leave the country that night. You know, if it were part of its agenda, it would probably have done those kind of things. So you could see that those periods were periods of plots within plots, you know, all kinds of things. So Babangida, I would like to conclude, I don't think he was about what are they going to think about me. No. He had done what he had to do. He had become a victim of his own machination, and he probably was ready, because, as I said earlier on, he was very emphatic. And, you know, well, some will say maybe that's also deception by telling me that he was not going to. He need not tell me that I was not going to write. Maybe he would have just said, I'm considering it. He was emphatic, you know. He just the way people like Chief Enauro, Tony Enauro, said he was not going to write about, he was not going to do his autobiography beyond the fugitive offender that he wrote. I tried several times to convince Chief Enauro to write. I said, look, gentlemen, I'm going to die with my story. You know, there are things that happened under Babangida that anyone who, you know, really want to convince people, you know, and wanted to even write the real story could not write. So that was why we're given that trash that has been presented as his autobiography. There are so much that he cannot come out, he could not even come out to do. So I want to conclude that you know, and I don't want to mention names here. I know those, again, you know, who were close to him from the academics, who put pressure on him to let's do this thing. It's going to help you. It's going to do this and that kind of. And okay, if after too much pressure, let's go ahead. That, I think, was why.
Can a military leader have a presidential library?
Okay. Well, Prof, you might agree that General Babangida is not the first military leader to have a presidential library. There is one in Ota, in Abeokuta. So there's one in Abeokuta that you know, but you know, so there's precedent to this. But whether it's the proper thing, and you may also recall that leader, Prof, although he had transmuted them from being military leader to civilian leader, but he did that while he was in office. He did that and mobilized public resources to set up he was not a military leader at that time, but he only had just shed his khaki for Agbada, and his attitude was basically the same. There are ways that these things are done in other parts of the world. Unfortunately, the sort of examples that we are setting in this is not examples. They are not examples that in the long. They are not best practice examples that we are setting. I'm sorry to say. And just one quick point about one of the things, because I just benefited a great deal from some of the insights that Senator Ojudu has shared. One of the things Babangida also said in his book, and I understand that I'm digressing slightly, but since we are talking about gaps in the book, which might be valuable for those that got, it's the fact that he said consistently in his book that he tried using both the military and police to investigate, get to the bottom of those who killed Delegiwa. But he failed, that nothing happened because Chief Ganifa Eme was hounding him most of the time. But Babangida forgot to say there's a gentleman called Abubakar Sav, all right? A panel by Abubakar Sav investigated and had a result about what actually happened to Delegiwa. We would need to see that. Babangida will need to tell us what happened to the Abubakar Sav report. He needs to tell us. He needs to come clean, you know, instead of writing 111,000 words of taking responsibility and not a single word of saying sorry. He needs to come clean on some of those. One must give him credit, to be honest. And as Professor Ochonu and Wale said at the beginning, that we are happy that at least we are able to, apart from Obasanjo, we have another former leader in recent times who has come to give us some insights about how governments work. So a lot of credit must be given to him for that. But if you are going to come clean, then come clean. You know, it's not about the 17 billion that was donated there. I'm sure it was not for Babangida. Babangida doesn't need 17. If anything, Nigeria needs repatriation from him. It needs reparation from him. Not, you know, he doesn't need 17 billion for anything. Some folks have tried to find a way to help themselves. Good for them. But what we are concerned about discussing here, obviously, is the value or lack thereof of the book. And the gaps, to me, in spite of the commendable effort of writing it at all, the gaps are quite... I think the good thing about the gaps, obviously, is that the gaps might provoke the writing of more books on this subject. And we wait to see.
Well, I now want to invite members of the audience, thank them for their patience. It is only those on Zoom who can ask questions. We cannot take questions from YouTube, people, Facebook, and others. If you want to ask a question, please indicate. Kole Odutola. What's your question, please? Kindly proceed with your question.
Well, I was finding it difficult to unmute myself, but finally I have. Thank you very much, Prof, and thanks to all the panelists that have spoken. My question is, to those of you who have personal relationship or have encountered IBB in one form or the other, there's this myth that goes around that the man has read Machiavelli back to back, and that just like the present president, according to Patitomi, that if you start a paragraph, that the present president, Asiwaju, can complete it for you. Why am I asking this? I'm asking it because it seems as if he had a playbook. And there are times when you can trace a playbook to a person, you can almost think about their next step. Because if you look at the way Babangida went, he didn't take anything to chance at all. I mean, I met him when I was covering Dodan Barracks, when he was at Dodan Barracks. And one of the things everybody on the beat said was that this man has a fantastic memory. And, you know, I will never know the truth, whether the intelligence were the ones that were giving him, but he would get things so correct that you're wondering. And the same thing with his friend, MK Abiola. They pride themselves as having a photographic memory. And I think it was Stanley Makebu that wrote about that you should fear men who rely so heavily on their own memory. So I'm wondering, is there anyone here who encountered him? How do you relate this idea that he's that he read Machiavelli back to back and that he almost took it as a Bible? Am I the only one who heard that, or are there people who heard it too? Thank you very much, Prof.
Yeah, Prof, I think I should be able to answer that. If
Go ahead, please. Go ahead.
Okay, I think you are very correct. I kept telling my friends that after Chief Babafemi Ojudu, Babangida is one person who actually prepared himself to govern Nigeria. You know, he tried to know everything that needed to be done. You know, reading Machiavelli, reading about Ataturk. You know, the former ruler of Turkey. And he also tried to study the ways of Nigerians, the character of an average Nigerian, his aspiration, you know, and his weakness, you know. So he was very adept at that. He was not tribalistic. If you are Igbo and he thinks you are going to be useful for him, he will cut you. You are Yoruba, he will cut you wherever you are from. He will cut you and then use you for whatever is missing. And he thinks ahead equally. You know, who could this person be to me in future? What do I need to know about him? How do I cage him? If you then, you know, try to go beyond what I should use him for. And the other thing, which I picked up when I first met with him shortly after he left power, was when we started discussing, he looked at us and said, look, you guys, you take Nigeria too seriously. We are playing games. It's a game. And I said, what do you mean, General? He said, look, just these things that you take seriously, we come together, you know, joke about it and laugh about it. And I then asked him, look, we are talking about the, you know, affairs of millions of men and women. And you said that is a game. How can it be a game? Suppose you play these games and Nigeria get to the precipice. You say, oh, Femi, no, there is always that hand there that will pull it back, you know, from the precipice. You know, so you see that attitude. And if time permits, he gave me an example of how it's a game. There was the election to the Constituent Assembly, and the former Vice Chancellor of Ahmadu Bello, Professor, what's his name now? The very popular one, you know, who expelled so many students, you know, wanted to contest to go there. He now said, I quickly asked one of my people to go and get me one of the students that he expelled from ABU. And he said he provided him money, go and challenge that professor. And, you know, the man challenged the professor and defeated the professor. And he called him later after, Prof, you have been defeated by one of your students. You know, that kind of, and said they laughed over it. That is the attitude of, you know.
The luncheon, all the enemies came together, all the friends.
Yes, and look at that as well. You know, I also think that he enjoys seeing the feebleness of human beings, you know, taunting you with money, with patronage, and believing that every Nigerian, you know, will succumb to that. Let me also say that when we went to see him, we chose to, myself and Bayo Ononuga, we chose to take along with us one of the youngest reporters we had then, Muyiwa Adekeye, so that at least if anybody says anything about us, he could come out and say, look, no, it wasn't so. And the three of us, as soon as our engagement with him ended about 1 a.m., you know, they pulled one heavy bag, you know, Ghana must go back and say, yeah, gentlemen, this is for you. And we said, no, that general, you know, we are just starting a relationship after all that, you know, all the antagonism between us. Why should we now be taking money from you? He shook his head. He couldn't believe it that some young men could reject his money. Then he went further and said, look, you know, gentlemen, you know, as if it was a joke, I'm still in town. No, you guys should not sleep, you know, alone or whatever. I could send people to town to go and we now say, we've traveled all day. How could we, you know, go and be looking, we accept that kind of offer from you? Okay, all right. If that is it, well, when are you leaving town tomorrow? He said 8 a.m. Okay, I will send a driver to come and pick you, to take you to Abuja. By 4 a.m., I woke up by and said, look, let's get out of here. What I'm trying to point out is this. I've been wondering ever since why he chose to invite us to Mina, to engage us in that manner. And I think he just wanted to test our resolve to see if we are just ordinary, like every other Nigerian who goes to him to beg him up for money, who change their opinions and principles because of money or other things. So
Simon Mary, Simon Aikwa, Simon. Simon Mary. Yes, sir.
So he is someone who always like to conquer.
Go ahead, please. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed the conversation. I want to preface my questions by a few comments, which has been triggered by Senator Ojudu's last words.
Yes.
I think my generation, I am a professor of theology at the University of Portland in the United States. My generation, the greatest angst we have against Babangida was exactly what you're saying right now, that he institutionalized a culture of corruption in the country, the culture of fundamental philosophical idealism that should guide the nation. He destroyed it. So there were other military rulers in Nigeria, but what he did is primarily unforgivable. And I'm glad you brought that up. I was waiting for that comment.
Right.
That said, I am very optimistic about the book, in the sense that he has created a moment of grace for the retrieval of lapsed consciousness and memory in the nation. We have an entire generation who may not know him for what he did. But by bringing up this book, we've spent the last more than 2 hours talking about the book, and more conversations are going to occur. So a transfer of collective memory is going to be passed on to maybe Gen Z, who may not have that memory. So I think he just, without knowing it, he has done us a very good favor. I have 3 questions, and one is for you. The first one is for Senator Ojudu. And it goes there. It says, what was the vision of Nigeria for you journalists at the time you were working, when you were a journalist? What was the vision you were hoping to achieve? And then I also want you to reflect again, when you became a senator, was it the same vision? Was there a continuity of that vision or a disruption? That's for you. And then I have a question for you, Mr. Wale Lawal. It goes this way. What's the vision of Nigeria that you would say is guiding your generation today? And how does that vision address the crisis of tribal and religious hyper-consciousness that is defining Nigeria? And then the last question is for all of you. What political philosophy will you say is shaping contemporary Nigeria?
Moses can take that. Please write down these questions. Please write down this question. Please write down your questions. We'll save time if we don't answer one-on-one.
Yes, Professor, thank you very much, and everybody. My name is Femi Ojudu. I'm also a journalist, like my fellow namesake, who we worked together in Concord in those days. Well, I came in when Asu was talking, and I had him mention that under Babangida, no fewer than 78, persons were killed. If I get, because I wrote the figure down, no fewer than 78 people were killed were executed under Babangida. And he also gave us the figure that no fewer than 41 newspapers were shut down, including the Concord newspaper where I worked that time, and that's really disrupted my progression in Concord. However, the point I want to make goes along with the question asked by Professor Falola, that why do bad people, why do they stay so long in existence? And my question is, I think based on that fact, it's time for us to look at the fact that human lives are very precious, considering the fact of this figure relayed by Asu and the confession by Babangida on the role he played in the disruption of our nation, in the killing of many people. Do we allow this man to go like this? I had this similar question from Senator Ojudu a couple of weeks ago. Is it not time for civil society organizations to come together and take IBB and co to the International Court of Justice for genocide, okay, and the destruction of our nation with our democracy? This is how we can take steps so that leaders can know that even they spend 100 years or 200 years, they will account for their sins one day. If you don't do this, and we allow Babangida to go like that, definitely we are not looking to history. Thank you very much. God bless you.
Ugo Nwokoji, I've not seen you in a decade. Professor Beckley, I have not seen you in 10 years. The last time I saw you was at Wedding's daughter.
Yes, I'm doing good. And you?
Good to see you.
Nice to see you again. And well, good morning from California, everybody. It's still morning here, 10:45, which accounts for why I was late. And I thank the panelists, for the incredible job they've done in the short time that I have been here. The thing I want to speak to refers to the question that Professor Falola asked, which people have been asking since Babangida this launching about the presidential library, and people don't understand why a military ruler, a dictator, should have a presidential library. And I understand their question. But at the same time, I welcome the possibility of such a library. We should now do. Apart from the very fact that library infrastructure in Nigeria has fallen apart, we should welcome the addition to our archives, especially well-resourced one. But I also noticed that people, like Azu, held Babangida to task. For example, talking about a report on Delegiwa by Abubakar Saad, and then end up not providing the report. Those are the things that we should insist in a presidential library. We want to see it all. And but at the same time, Azu, I think I agree fundamentally with Azu when he equated the library Babangida is doing, which again I welcome, with the library in Ota, Obasanjo's presidential library. I think there is no direct comparison because Obasanjo was an elected president for 8 years. Based on that alone, we can talk of a presidential library and not necessarily. But
Okay,
because he has, yes.
Make a point. Is there a second point you want to make?
Well, I haven't. The point that I want to let me complete this.
Okay.
The Ota Library, which I've had the privilege of being to, I thank God that we have that. And I take this opportunity to enjoin everyone who is interested in Nigerian historical research to visit that place. You will see in that place things you cannot see elsewhere. So those of us who do research, we at least thank Obasanjo for thinking in that way. So, those are the things, and that's why I welcome this presidential library and any others that will come, even from military rulers. Thank you
very much. You are talking as an historian who uses archives. Thank you. Emeka Wadiora, Emeka, thank you. Sir?
Yeah, my name is Emeka Wadiora. I have to go to okay here.
You're fine. We can hear you.
Yeah. My name is Emeka Wadiora. I'm a professor at Temple University in Philadelphia. There are two things that I wanted to ask the panelists if they can give me more information. I've been particularly interested in the works of Mama Mbata, the writer that was executed by Ibrahim Babangida. They were all classmates at BIDA, where I used to teach, by the way, some 45 years ago. Does anybody have information as to the appeal process, if it ever happened, with the case of Mama Mbata particularly?
There was no appeal. Was there an
No.
appeal?
No.
There was,
There was no appeal.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just wondering if there's other information that could be put together for me to understand the process that led to, particularly Mama Mbata, who was the great writer, what happened to him, the process itself before he was executed.
Well, there are reports on it, and his wife too wrote. And his children are adults now. One is a medical doctor. I think I've seen one or two things his wife has written.
If I give information, Prof, I think General Duncan Bali also gave a number of interviews where he tried to look at the process and all of the things that happened behind the scene, and how he was even compelled to announce the execution of Batsa. I think if you lay your hand on African Concord and the news of that period, we must have had about 3 interviews with Duncan Bali, where he talked extensively about that incident. Yes.
Thank you.
Olalika Ajia, Asu, please, you want to say something now? Yes, go ahead.
Yes, very quickly, just to add to what Senator Ojudu has said. I mean, I think I also mentioned it in the course of our conversation, that they were arrested before, they had been arrested before the decree through which they were executed was passed. That happened. But even that decree provided for appeal, but they were executed even before they had the opportunity to appeal. So.
Olalika Ajia. Unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you. It's clear the verdict of history on Ibrahim Babangida and his elder brother, Olusegun Obasanjo, very clear. These were 2 brilliant military men who had the opportunity to turn Nigeria towards the light. Instead, they drove Nigeria right down into the abyss of darkness. As Senator Babafemi Ojudu just said, we will spend probably another 50 years trying to get out of that darkness. God help us. One is encouraged by Wale, who is there along with other young people trying to use modern technology, new knowledge, entrepreneurship, courage to draw us out of that. I belong to those who were taught by people like Biodun Jeifo, Femi Ojudu, that left. That sometimes ago on Toyin Falola interview, we were told that the left has left. Now I want to ask you guys, how can we bring that left back? Comprising of academics and trade unionists, labor. Where are we going to find the platform, apart from social media, that will provide the spine for Nigeria to go from the thesis of these terrible military dictators and bad politicians, the antithesis that we hope to see, and arrive at a synthesis that will take Nigeria to the promised land. Thank you.
Ozi Uduma. Ozi. If Ozi is not
Hello. Hi. So sorry. I was unable to unmute myself. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ozi Uduma. I'm zooming in from the state of Michigan, and I'm a recent graduate of the African Studies program at Oxford. So I have a quick comment and a question. And my comment is, I've been reflecting on the question of where are our public intellectuals or our public historians. And I wanted to pose the other question that maybe we should also consider is who are we deeming public intellectuals and historians? I come to 20th and 21st century Nigerian history through the visual arts and through Nigerian feminist. And so that is how I enter into this particular conversation. And my reflections are very much based off of the art and the writings of those at the time. And so just thinking about how are we expanding our definitions of public intellectuals and public historians, and without expanding, what do we lose when we fail to expand those? My question is, and this probably will be the lifelong question, but what is the responsibility of historians to the larger publics, especially in a rise of with the rise of anti-intellectualism? And we've seen easily, the Prof mentioned the fact that there might be a time where Donald Trump's image is sanitized. I was a child who grew up during the Bush era, and I see how his image has been sanitized, or how, former military dictators have been able to be elected as democratically elected into seat of powers again. So I am very curious, while this conversation is really great, what does it mean for us to translate it to the larger public, knowing that history is very continuous, and that the history of then is still affecting the history of today. Thank you.
Funsho Adeshola.
Hello, sir.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah. I thank you very much indeed for this opportunity. I have listened very intensely to the discussions by the panelists, and I've been enamored by their analysis. I'm a professor of international relations at Babafemi Ojudu University in Ile-Ife. My question is stoked further by what what Senator Femi Ojudu mentioned, that the greatest victim of Babangida's action in power is the Nigerian state. And like one of us who has asked a question recently, that why is there no consequence for the deeds of Babangida in a country like ours? Thank you.
Margaret, okay, or Margaret, okay? Margaret. Sorry, ma.
Good evening. Yeah, hello, sir.
Good evening, ma.
Good evening, sir. Good evening, everyone on the panel.
Yes.
Thank you, sir, for organizing this. I thank all the panelists. Yeah, my question is on our politicians and our political leaders. I want to ask, because I feel our political leaders are doing this country a lot of harm. The political leaders and the politicians, not only Nigeria, maybe most of the African countries, we have a lot of harm being done to the nation. I heard recently Amechi made a statement that politicians have come to maim, to steal, and to win elections. Is this how we are going to move our nation forward? Because if we continue like this, my fear is that we will continue to retrogress instead of progressing. And I'm afraid if things continue like this, how are we going to get to the promised land that we are looking up to? I would like Senator Ojudu to say something on this. Thank you.
Thank you, and I want to thank the media who are present, who are Vanguard, Guardian, Punch, Tribune. They will join. I'm eager to know how they will cover their stories in the days ahead. Abiodun Ogunyemi, former president of ASU and professor of education. I've introduced you, so you can go straight to your question.
Thank you very much, Prof. I met Moses, my good friend. I've been somewhere before now. So before joining the meeting, I hope Moses will remember our meeting in Makurdi, which was somehow explosive. But I think we have gone beyond that. But let me say that I saw some good points in his submission today, talking about how the academia has been adversely affected. We all know that the diminishing space for public intellectualism started with the onslaught of the military against the academia. And I would just cite 2-3 instances. We know the era when the likes of Edwin Madunago, Omotoyo Olorode, Dipo Fashino, Escotoyo, and so were being attacked for teaching what they were not paid to teach. And those were the people that were actually conscientizing us in those days, such that we could raise a generation of critical thinkers, unlike what the military did to us after that. What they did to us when they said those who taught us ideologically inclined ideas were teaching what they were not paid to teach. They sent some of them packing, including Edwin Madunago from UNILAG and so on. That actually affected the kind of response the academia could give. It weakened the system. And shortly after, they started diluting the system. Some of us will remember that at some point, a military general was made the vice chancellor of ABU. I think we still remember him. So that trend has continued. And to add insult to the injury, poverty has been used as a weapon now to weaken intellectuals, such that since 2009, Nigerian academics have been on the same salary structure. And so when people ask, why are they not as vocal, as intellectually savvy as they used to be, they have been pauperized. And now there is a big manifestation of existential threat to what they are doing. And we, even in ASU, I still participate in the leadership of ASU, of course. We are just struggling to cope. See what they are doing to our universities. They are proliferating universities. We are talking, they are threatening us. And who did they bring? They bring second-rate academics to come and take over. So what they did to us in the system was to dilute the system such that even those of you who have ideas who think we should synthesize and synchronize our thoughts such that we could articulate a position that will be progressive for the nation, you will be overwhelmed by the majority conservatives and second-rate scholars that they have unleashed on us. What they do most of the time is to appoint their political assistants. When they are leaving, they appoint them into, they turn them into the system. They unleash them on the system. Those who manage to have the last grade, the master's degree, are turned to the vice chancellors to be recruited as lecturers. And here we are helpless. We keep talking, but we are overwhelmed. So what I'm saying in essence is that it is not that Nigerian academics are intellectually lazy. There are still the cream of scholars who came into the system with their job cut out and with clear ideas of what they should be doing as intellectuals. And those ones, they can still do the work of public intellectualism. But I want to say that today, majority of those who work in the university system have nothing to do with that system. They do not even know why they are there. And because they were unleashed on the system by the politicians, it appears we're just managing to get along. I think what we should be talking about is a general sanitization, if I can put it like that. It's a general purification of the academic space, the intellectual space in Nigeria, such that those who are careerists, those who actually are ready to do the bits of government of the day, and they are not clear about the direction, because the system is supposed to be leading the way, but it's supposed to be to become the hub of innovation and inventions. But we are hardly able to do that. Once you raise issues about the underfunding, the poor facilities, and the enabling environment where you operate, you attack the enemy. And some of us are even put on the line for dismissal because of what we say and because of what we do. We don't know what our public intellectuals outside the academia, what they can do to assist the academics who are still trying to push the reins of progressive ideas. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Provost. That's the name on your question, please.
Thank you, sir. Am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you. You are breaking your fast, apparently.
Yeah, let me also appreciate the Professor Falola and the cream of panelists, our senator and other panelists here. Well, I just want to speak in line with the last speaker, that's my comrade, Professor Oguyemi, that I want our senior colleagues in the media to try and work with the likes of the progressive unions in the universities and other institutions to make sure that we're able to bring back that culture of what do you call it now? Public discussion, and to be able to also raise issues that also benefit the country. Because we are groomed from the university, I mean, including many of us and many of the panelists here, and that without generating the younger element, we'll be able to also take up the leadership position at the level of the student unionism, the unionism, the staff union, and so on and so forth. Because we need to generate public discussions to be able to chart a way forward or how the country can be better and be governed and run. And I think that our higher institutions have a very vital, and the media have a very vital role to play. So there must be that synergy that we used to have in the past, and a strong movement should also come up from this. So I want us to look at it from this perspective. Thank you very much.
I will take two more. We can allow members of the panel to take a rest and have their dinner. Chinedu Oko. Chinedu, please go ahead.
Prof?
Yes.
I am Chinedu Oko, contributing from Lagos. I can say that I am, Prof, I'm quite amazed by your intellectual acuity. You know, despite that you have aged and you are still as sound as you used to be. First of all, I want to engage Mr. Wale Lawal because he spoke for young people like me. He talked about protests not transforming into sustained movements. And when we look at NSAS, for example, and we look at what Showore has been doing over the years, the likes of Deji, Adeyanju, Aisha Yusuf, and the rest of them, Showore has been consistent. And Mr. Wale, don't you see what Showore is doing as a sustained movement over the years? Showore has been consistent in his message. Adeyanju has also been consistent in his message. I would rather think that the political system has somewhat fortified itself against the sentiments and opinion and resistance of the public, the Nigerian public. It might not to me really seem that we haven't really sustained our agitation. We have. A good example is what happened in 2023. The 2023 general election was a translation of the people's angst in the 2020 NSAS. The Nigerian youth participated in that election as a protest against the government of the day, against what the government did to Nigerian citizens in that NSAS protest. As a matter of fact, the obedient movement, if you may, the obedient movement was a continuation in a way of that NSAS 2020 protest. So we have, as young people, we have sustained this protest and agitation in different ramifications, but rather the system has somewhat fortified itself.
You've made your point.
Against that. Then secondly, my second question will go to Senator Babafemi Ojudu. We have said a whole lot about the timing of General IBB's autobiography. I don't want to say that General IBB has a good sense of timing, but will I be right, sir, Senator Babafemi, will I be right to say that there is a convergence of history? I know that from IBB's body language since 1993, from his body language throughout the series of elections that has taken place, IBB had always sought means of pacifying the Southwest. Not just the Southwest, but the South. And I know that IBB was very quiet in support of Tinubu's emergence as Nigeria's president. Could it be that that he felt that this period of Tinubu's administration could be the best time, the period that a Yoruba man is in government could be the best time for him to also, bring out this book and also leverage on Tinubu's presence as a Yoruba person in the presidency. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Aliyu Abdu. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Prof. I've tried to turn on the video, but it seems I have a problem here.
I see you.
I hope I'm audible.
Yes, Aliyu.
So thank you, first of all, Prof, for initiating and sustaining this very important weekly program. I always find it very, very enriching and very valuable. So I hope and pray that you will sustain it to the future. Now, I briefly want to make my comment on this aspect of the theme for this week's program. That is mainly the biography of IBB. I would like to point out here that much as the key subject is the launching of IBB's biography, but I think the key subject, even in the biography, the focus has all along been the annulment, June 12th annulment of Abiola's emergence as our president. Now, But to me, I think, much as this is a very, very significant theme in the history of Nigeria, I would like to look at it also within the general class cleavage of between the military and the principal actor, in this case Abiola himself. I'm thinking that not much analysis, not much study is being done in the area of the relationship of the key player, that is Abiola, and the military class that annulled the June 12th elections, and their relationships, and what could have the consequences of what we would have had, whether the annulment may or may not have changed the course of Nigerian history, seeing the class relationship. But on a deeper level, I am thinking that the significance of this book should also focus on the other important actions taken by IBB and on the Nigerian state generally. And particularly, I'm looking at his role in entrenching the country into the IMF traps. These issues are things that I think we gloss over. And they are some of the fundamental problems that this guy has created and has maintained our current condition and our demise here as a country. So much as I feel that the June 12th issue is a very significant key theme in the history of IBB regime, but I don't think is something that I should let allow us to gloss over other serious matters that are on the IBB regime. Thank you very much.
Well, it's an important question, and I will pose it differently to the members of the panel. How come it's difficult for them to resolve their elite struggles? If you look at the moment very well, when the election was annulled, as Aliu said, the civilian harm and the military harm, they had coalesced in some ways. Abiola made a lot of money from his own connections with the military. So you could argue to develop that it was actually one of them. Why will you reject one of you who is not a threat to you? So Kada, you've changed your mind. Okay, Kada has changed his mind. So please don't answer all the questions. Yes, I will call on you. Please don't answer all the questions. So answer the questions you want and make your closing remark.
Okay.
Because this is the last opportunity for you to say something. Let me start with Asu. Answer the questions you want and make your closing remark.
Thank you very much, Prof. And I would just answer two questions and then close. You asked the question first about why good people die, but and then I sort of glossed over it. But then the question came back. I think it was asked by I don't know who it was. Why good people die early? I think it was the second questioner that asked the question. I'm not providing any profound answers, but my sense about why that happens, there are three basic reasons, obviously. There is the, if you like, spiritual view that good people die early because they are taken up, because some forces, divine forces, do not want them to see any more harm further down the road? That's an answer. And then, of course, there's this philosophical view that, well, the world is such a complicated place. You know, it's unfair. The world is not always fair as people expect it to be. Things don't always go the way we expect, or, we expect them to. So, as a consequence, things don't always turn out the way we expect them to naturally turn out. And then, of course, there is the karmic belief. So there are basically three reasons. And as I said, people can read up all of this if they want, to sort of explain this whole business of why good people sort of die early. Then there was a last question you raised, Prof, which you tried to reframe the question of, the class, how this, the so-called, what you described as a coalescence of the classes when it came to, the matter of election. Because to use your phrase, Abiola was, to use your phrase, one of them. So why didn't they want one of them? What was wrong in allowing one of them to take over power? But I think I see it slightly differently, Prof. This was not a matter of Nigerians voted for Abiola knowing who he was. So when people like David Mark said to Babangida, for example, that if he handed over power to Abiola, he was going to shoot him. And this, again, you can find in Maxillion's book. You can find it in his book, Soldiers of Fortune. David Mark actually said on the record that if Abiola handed over power, if Babangida handed over power, he was going to shoot him. But we did not vote, Nigerians who voted for Abiola did not vote for him knowing or believing that he was a saint. What's and all, I think it was the sanctity, is the question of the sanctity of the process. That is why Nigerians feel so deeply embittered by what happened. We didn't vote. Nobody was looking for an angel or for a saint to become Nigeria's president. He had these weaknesses. He had this. But the fundamental thing is that Nigerians voted for him. And when I interviewed Babangida 9 years ago, he told me on record that the election was inconclusive. Obviously, he told me then, at that time, at an interview I had with him, knowing he was telling a lie. Nigerians didn't vote for Abiola because they were expecting that they were voting for a saint. They voted for him because, what's and all, he was the man they wanted. And the least that Nigerians expected was that their choice for the person that they voted as president should have been respected. Because there are quite a number of questions, and I'm sure that there are more than enough questions to go around. I would once again like to close on this note by saying that I think it's a good thing on the whole that we have this book and we're having a conversation around it. I think it will be a catalyst, in my view, for more books, more perspectives to be written, some of the gaps that we have identified. We hope in future that we'll also be able to gather on a call like this to discuss subsequent books based on some of the gaps that we have identified and see how far that takes us further down the road. I'd like to thank you once again, Prof, for having me. Thank you.
So as a writer, I've read books. How do we popularize books, not just waiting for an opportunity like this? The conference model doesn't work. You write a book, you speak to temple. That's not a good model. I've contacted 2 television stations, and the answer is very disappointing. Because what they told me is that the publisher must pay for the time. Oh, they said the publisher must pay for the time. And I said, it's not like the programs on Sunday when the churches pay for programs. And I'm still waiting on the second one. And we need to put, there's a book club. One television station has a book club.
That's Channels TV.
We need to, I'm still in conversation because the first one has collapsed. We need to take books to television programs. Not just our books, but major books like this. Formalize the process and begin to say, young men and women, these are the books you should read. You don't want to read all books. I don't read all books myself. But major moments like this, we should not just look at them. Even I know what he went through to publish this book, because I was contacted with the manuscript. It's difficult. It's very difficult. No Premium Times publish a book. So maybe on another conversation, we have to talk about this and say radio stations, and very happy that some radio stations join us today. But we have to take this, and Wale, please, let me give you this assignment. Let's all work together and say, one major television station, once a week, let's take a book about our country and discuss it. So that we don't wait for people like Babangida to generate this kind of controversy. Moses, you can answer some questions and make it.
Yes, thanks, Prof. One question that intrigued me here is why it came up twice, why there has been no consequence for the likes of Babangida. Well, there are times when the need for national cohesion or the imperative of national cohesion and nation building overrides the need for retribution or justice. I'm just going to leave it at that. There are so many instances where in Rwanda, in Sierra Leone, where amnesty was provided to people who didn't deserve it because the nation needed to move forward. We can apply that same logic here as well. What is the role of the historian in the age of anti-intellectualism, the lady asked? Well, the historian is supposed to provide a framework for understanding current events, the historical framework. We historians think in the long term. 10 years is nothing to the historian. So we need to be able to bring comfort to people who are in distress in the present, who are disturbed by current events. So say, look, these things have happened before, and societies have been able to come back from them. Societies go through cycles and they evolve. So it's not a big deal. Relax. Everything will work itself out. That's the historian's view of these things that can provide certain comforts in these turbulent times. Who is a Nigerian public intellectual? My thought on that is simply anyone who articulates an intellectual position and disseminates it through the multiple outlets that we have now, including social media. So yes, the definition of an intellectual has become more capacious than it used to be. When will the left come back? Somebody asked. Well, I'm sorry to disappoint that professor that asked this question. The old left is never coming back. The world has moved on. There is something now called the new left. The new left is not wedded to this old ideological rigidity of socialism and a socialized society. Now, the new left is much more pragmatic about allowing the space for private enterprise, for wealth creation. And now, what the new left is pushing for is that the weak and vulnerable be protected and that resources be allocated in ways that provide opportunities equally. What political ideology should shape the country? A little bit of ideologies from the left and a little bit of the ideology from the right. Well, let me say something about this stuff that came up earlier about IBB. You know, a friend of mine, not myself, somebody told a friend of mine, don't ever meet IBB. Try not to ever meet him. Even if he invites you, don't go. Don't honor the invitation. You know why? Because he has this inexplicable personal charm. Maybe not so inexplicable to people like Senator Ojudu who has met him, but he has this charm that people who have met him, who went to those meetings hating him, left those meetings liking him, you know, and changing their opinions of him. Why do I say that? I think IBB, like him or hate him, has this remarkable capacity for co-opting people. And in the book, he talks about how he was able to get all of those respected intellectuals and academics to work for him. He was able to harvest their ideas and their brains and to co-opt them into his initiatives and to his agenda. Why was he able to do that? I submit to you guys that there's a little bit of personal charm involved in that. Some people have it, some people don't. And, you know, I was reading a piece by David Brooks in the New York Times yesterday. He was speaking about Trump, but it's related to our conversation here. And what he says is that it's a controversial argument, but he says in international diplomacy and in issues of governance, that 90% of governance and these types of decisions are based on relationships. They are not based on ideology. They are not based on philosophical disagreements or agreements. They are not even based on high intellectual ideas. They are based on relationships. And I think that Babangida was able to cultivate relationships across the cultural spectrums of Nigeria that to this day serves to rehabilitate him in ways that you and I cannot even imagine. I'll make three remarks as I close. One of them is something that I think we should, as intellectuals, even as academics, focus on in this book. That is a critical aspect of this book that I've not seen people discuss, which is that this is the first book in a long time that I've seen that mounts a very unabashed and robust defense of military coups and military rule. I don't know if you picked up on that Babangida is shamelessly and mounting a defense of military rule. He goes, there are whole sections in the book where he says the good things that the military rule brought to Nigeria, that the military did. And then he blames the politicians, obviously, for messing things up. So I think we should take that claim seriously, because I think that claim can be explained in the context of what is going on in the Sahelian states, whereby military rule is coming to those places and the military is finding some legitimacy in popular consciousness. They are being welcomed back into the governing space. And I think it's not a coincidence that Babangida is able to robustly defend military rule in this moment. I think also another reason why we should take this book seriously is that for the first time, we have Babangida revealing a lot of things about his personal life, his maternal pedigree. Previously, he had left those topics to the realm of popular speculation, right? Some people say, oh, he's Yoruba, his father is this. I think we need to know the caliber of people ruling us, or the caliber of people who have ruled us in the past. Their personal lives are as important because they constitute their consciousness, their socialization that lead them to make decisions. And finally, I want to say that another thing that comes out of the book is that in several sections of the book, Babangida privileges the role of the individual politician. He blames the individual politician. He blames their choices, their decision making. He never blames the structures that constrain the choices and the decisions of the politicians. He never blames the systems themselves. And I think it is a very cunning maneuver on his part, because if you place the blame on the systems and the structures, then obviously he's culpable. He will be culpable for creating those institutional and structural constraints. But when you place the blame on the individual, it exculpates him. And throughout the book, you find this pattern of exculpation. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Senator, you're welcome back and answer some questions.
Okay, thank you very much. I have been asked, what propelled us to do what we did. I think, I touched that a little bit earlier when I said the kind of education we received in Ife. We were hot-headed. We had lecturers who told us that the purpose of educating us was to go out there and change our society for good. And they built confidence in us. They told us that we should not fear anybody, we should not fear inconvenience and all of that. And we were out to demand for democracy, to demand for good governance, to demand for the rights of the people. And that we were not going to compromise at all, no matter the inconveniences to our person. And somebody then asked, having done that as a journalist, what happened? Do you go further to pursue this when you were in the Senate? Yes, of course I did. And as I always said, I went to the Senate hoping that I was going to be part of, you know, a solution to problems of Nigeria. But I got there, it was something else. And I've said often that my 4 years in the Senate was, you know, perhaps one of the worst years of my life, you know, and I almost suffered depression, you know, because I mean, as a journalist, I'm able to even see things happening more than every other person. There was an occasion I had to call the reporters in the Senate to my office, and I told them, gentlemen, are you not seeing all the rots around you? Are you not seeing all of these things going around, the corruption and all of that? And I said, look, I'm willing to give you information so that we can expose all these things to the world. Because at that time, even to get called to speak, to get recognized to speak was a problem. David Mark, of course, marked me down as somebody who should not be allowed to speak. And I also mentioned here all the 4 years we were in the Senate. We tried to get the Senate to even in a way recognize June 12th. But David Mark was always saying no way, not when he's you know, president of that Senate. You know, so, and I brought this journalist to my office and I told them all of this. They went to tell the principal officers. A colleague of mine called me one day and said, Femi, don't get killed in this thing. You had a meeting in your office with journalists, you know, and they came to tell us, you know. So from that moment on, I stopped relating with journalists in the Senate. I just kept to myself and I just made up my mind that on no account will I come back to work in this kind of environment. Nigerian problem is so deep-seated that I do not know. It will take quite a long time. And I don't know if any of you have read Kalmia's book, This House Has Fallen. When he tried to ask Alhaji MD Yusuf, the former Inspector General of Police, to compare the regimes of Abacha and Babangida, MD Yusuf said, for the problems caused for Abacha, under 5-10 years, you know, we're going to get over that. But for Babangida's one, it's going to take several decades. That his governance has affected us to the root. Look at, it wasn't just for any reason that most of the best of our lecturers left Nigeria after SAP was introduced, you know, and they all took flight, went abroad, achieved more than they could have achieved back home, and then left people there who could not, you know, influence as much as they did. And that continues to today, you know. So when you are asking, how do we solve this problem? And I want to say by writing of that, unless there is a rupture in this country, this problem will not be solved. If we are looking at the evolutionary process to help us, election today, another election 4 years after, we may be on it for the next 200 years and we may still be on the same point because the society is so rotten now, so rotten. Prof, I've been living in Ekiti for 2 years now. I've related with university lecturers. I've related with politicians. I've related with young people. The kind of things I see, the kind of ethos that rule their lives, it's an overwhelming thing that, look, it's not going to work. There is no ethics anymore. There is no morality anymore. Lecturers are undercutting each other. There's a dog-eat-dog affair in the universities around there. You know, the students do not even care about academics any longer. We're going to have a function for Shudare. We invited university students. They told us that we should bring money before they could come, you know, to come and attend. Imagine inviting us in those days when you were a lecturer in Ife to come for your seminar. We'll be struggling to be there because we know that there is something to learn from you and from your colleagues. They said we should provide food, we should provide their money, you know, before they can attend, you know, a colloquium in honor of someone who could one day win the Nobel Prize. You know, it's for me, we have a lot on our hand to do. And I kept telling people, if we have to go through elections, and let me just say, as a politician, from my own front row observation, there are no longer elections in Nigeria. People are paid money to vote. You know, they then, where the voters are not enough, they then change figures. And when you protest, they say you go to court and you pay money to lawyers who can then help you pay judges, and you'll be given victory. So when will a Falola with bright ideas, principles, and exposure pass through that process to become president of Nigeria, it will never happen. You know, if ASU joins my party today and want to go to the Senate, all your past records as an editor and a journalist will not count. When I wanted to become governor, I brought in 15 lecturers from universities around Ekiti to meet with me almost on a daily basis. We crafted a beautiful manifesto. It didn't amount to anything. It is the money. So where then will the solution come from? Look, if you're talking about academics, you know, being used like Awolowo did, it is not going to happen. Awolowo himself could be seen as an academic. That's why, you know, he put a price, you know, on the value on what they are bringing on board. But today it is not so. The man who is those who are in power do not even see the need for academics and intellectuals in the first place. I'll give an example. I went for the funeral of a burial of a friend's mom at a cemetery, and I got to that cemetery and I saw that, you know, the graves of Nigerians of history, you know, they were collapsed in that place. The place was overgrown by weed, and I ran from there to meet a governor. I said, Your Excellency, in that cemetery lies the history of Nigeria. We should not allow it to be like that. You know what he told me? He said, we have not taken care of the living. Femi, you are talking about the dead. You know, it is a bad. So with that kind of person find value in the best economist in Nigeria, the best political scientists, or the best environmentalists, or the specialists in energy and whatever. No, they would rather, you know, bring around them people who are looking for contracts, people who can prostrate to them, and that will be it. So if we continue on this way, the next succession generation will be Yahoo boys. They have the money to pay voters on the day of election. Most of our state houses will become Yahoo centers, and I do not see then how we are going to get out of this problem, unless we have a rupture that, you know, will reshape all of us. I do not see. I'm not optimistic. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Wale, you have the last voice.
All right, thank you so much. I think, you know, it's only fitting. So I'm going to take three points mainly. I think the first is asking about, there was a question about how we can bring that left energy back. I think that was one question. And then the second was really talking about protests and how we create, or whether we were able to successfully create sustainable movements. And then my third point will just be about what next, what we can do next. To be honest, I think we can summarize everything in kind of one grand response. And I think the first thing is, on the first side of this is really thinking about organizing. I think when we talk about how we can bring the left back, it's not that there's no, you know, left or progressive voices left, you know, currently today. Whether or not the old, you know, the older leftist voices have left, there are still emergent voices. There are still, you know, quite a number of voices still very active. The issue is that these voices are often disparate. They're not organized. They're not in a collective, and they are often taking on individual individual projects as opposed to, you know, a kind of cohesive collective unit. So I think the person who asked that, there was a person who asked the question, I think his name is Emeka, who asked about, you know, the NSAS movement and was mentioning people like Showore, you know, Aisha Yusufu, all of these people. But, you know, the interesting thing about these people is that you are mentioning individuals. You're not mentioning a collective movement. And I think it's very important that when we talk about movements, or what really separates a kind of like individual goal or protest from an actual movement, is this idea of being organized, so across different areas. And I mean, these are not new things. You know, when we look into the history of Nigeria, we're coming from a time where if you wanted to run for office, there were ways in which universities were so organized and so interlinked that you could have student volunteers that would help you to go through each different to go through their neighborhoods and advocate for your cause. It was so organized that when you had, you know, progressive views or any types of views, to be honest, when you look at the ways in which elections were run during MKO's era, even, you know, as recently as that, students played a very key role. when we look at MKO, for example, the left played a very key role. And what did students do there? They were able to organize and go and sensitize factory workers. They were going across their individual neighborhoods. And I think the interesting thing about Nigeria is you realize that, at least as of today, there is a university in pretty much every single state. But the issue is that the student bodies of these states are not necessarily organized. That's one thing. Or the academic circles in those states are not as effectively organized as they used to be historically. And I've said in the past, the reasons for that being, number one, really just this military degradation of the university structure, but also the economic strangulation that structural adjustment programs really caused. A number of these universities were federally funded. And what did SAPs do? They took out the funding from there. So those structures have been eroded deliberately in many ways to feed a kind of military, repression over the years. And I think the second thing is that there needs to be a clear unifying ideology. We cannot just keep telling ourselves that we want to see a progressive Nigeria without really articulating what that progress actually means. If we're looking at progress, what does it mean for women? What does it mean for marginalized groups? What does it mean for queer people? What does it mean for people who are not necessarily in the mainstream? These are things that we saw in NSAS as well. There were women who reported during the protests that women were being groped, right? So we cannot have a situation where we're calling for the end-to-end SARS and people are still questioning how, the relevance of women in those protests, not really understanding how there is a double oppression that happens there where women are also exposed to sexual violence by SARS officials. So we are not even taking these movements as seriously as they need to be taken. And that is another reason why people lose hope in them and that apathy kind of, and that apathy grows. There was a comment about how we saw this kind of translate into the obedient movement. We saw this kind of translate into, the end bad governance. We saw this translate into the elections. Yes, but again, I believe that those are my own theory is that those were flashes in the pan. They were not sustained movements for the reasons I've mentioned earlier, because we still saw young people come against other young people to block them from voting in other areas. We still saw the same issues around women and the issues that are affecting women not being paid adequate attention because people felt, oh, it's not the right time, to discuss. But of course, women's issues are national issues as well. But it was interesting to see that even those lessons were not learned. A big example of where I felt like we could have shown signs of translating this into a sustainable movement was in the judicial panels. As somebody who covered the judicial panels very closely, the steam in those panels ran out very quickly. Judicial panels are boring. You have to go and sit down there, listen to people advocate cases. But all of a sudden, it's not the protests where people are reading, sharing articles. Nobody wanted to talk about the judicial panels. And even when we realized that it was a pretty much sham, there was very little noise made about, as much as we covered it in our own publication, you could see that, the interest had kind of lost steam. And that's what I mean by a movement. A movement cares about even the boring technical aspects of things, because it's not every day that we're going to go out to protest, right? So we need to care about the boring aspects of things. But I mean, for me, where does this leave us? I have to go back to the fact that IBB ends his book with a message, with a letter to the next generation, which personally I found to be deeply, profoundingly patronizing. But it's also in many ways, the ways in which the elder generation communicates with young people in Nigeria. He has all these comments about how young people need to rise up and, we're no longer the leaders of tomorrow, we're now the leaders of today. And it's very patronizing. It's a very annoying statement to make because we all live in the same country. You're telling us that we're the leaders of today, but I mean, we all live in the same country. I think, that part is very obvious. But I also think there's a big elephant in the room, right? We are in a gathering of academics. We are in a gathering where we're really thinking about the purpose of universities in today's Nigeria and really how to reignite that space. There's been a big conversation about how young people are turning away from intellectualism. And I will tell you for free that it would be dishonest for me to sit here and tell you that, oh, young people are losing interest because of social media, etc. No, young people are losing interest because of the universities themselves. You cannot have a Nigeria where young people care about intellectualism in a situation where the first places where they're facing, whether it's violence, whether they're facing oppression, is in university grounds. You cannot have young people interested in intellectualism when professors can tell them that you're going to fail my course, or no young person is ever going to pass my course, or where students are infantilized, can be slapped by the professors, or they're given ridiculous what's it called, rules that they need to follow that really do not apply in a 21st century world, we can only expect apathy and even disdain towards intellectualism. The big thing that I want to leave us with is, yes, it's great for us to talk about IBB's book. It's great for us to talk about how we can reignite the intellectual force. And I think that universities are still the perfect place to do that because the infrastructure is still there. There is no single institution that has a reach in the way that universities do. But universities cannot only be the place where young people learn to respect authority. It also needs to be the place where young people learn to challenge authority and to see that challenge yield results. I recently I've worked with young people who have been rusticated from their universities because they protested unfair, treatment at their universities. I recently had, an intern that worked with me and that was rusticated from the University of Ibadan and had to take the University of Ibadan to court and eventually won that case. But the question I always have is, what do you expect from young people that are experiencing that? What kind of attitudes do we expect from young people that are experiencing that towards the universities? We cannot get a world in which, there's a common conversation I'm always having with intellectuals today who now believe that the most interesting thinking about Africa is happening outside of universities. But we need to bring that thinking back into universities, and we need to encourage universities to become that space. We are it's very great that we live in an era that is not military. We live in an era that, say what you want, it's still a bit freer than what we're coming from before. But the issue is now, for us to encourage the kind of thinking that we want to see, we need to, universities really need to really nurture that, that kind of thinking. In a world where we no longer have dictators, we should no longer have authoritarian figures in universities. It really doesn't make, it really doesn't make any sense. And so for me, the thing that we need to do, whether it's to bring the left back, whether it's to reignite, that kind of intellectual force that we were seeing, is number one, on the young people side, we definitely need to be more organized. We definitely need to be more informed about the work that we, that we want to take on. But all of those things will be pointless if the very grounds that can foster that thinking are not enabling enough. As I mentioned earlier, universities need to not only be the place where people learn to respect authority, they also need to be the place where people are increasingly learning how to challenge, authority figures. And this is not a Nigeria alone problem. We are seeing this in the US with what is happening with Palestine, with the protesters, that were advocating for a free Palestine, and how they've been really, there's been a crackdown on university voices. The only difference is that we tend to see that in Nigeria on a very regular basis. People are kicked out of universities for speaking up. We cannot build a world in which intellectualism is respected or recognized or even encouraged across generations if that continues to happen. But thank you so much for having this conversation. I think it is a very necessary conversation to have as well.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank all of you for your brilliant contributions. 2 minutes after we close, the entire recording will be released to the public so that the conversation can continue. The media will carry aspects of interest to them, and I will write 2 or 3 major reports on this interview. I thank all of you. I thank our partners. I thank those who have covered this program. To our panelists, I'm very grateful. You can see it's not boring. We can keep continuing, but you have to go and have your dinner and break your fast. Thank you very much. We'll play music. For those of you who are interested in those music, please enjoy them. Good morning from Austin, Texas. Good evening to you, South Africa, Nigeria, and welcome to this program